Over the past 2 weeks, I've been asked to explain and to share words of wisdom on Russia's war on Ukraine. Politicians and so-called experts cast on television seem to be shooting theories from the hip, and no one seems to really know what's going on. Truth be told, neither do I. I've heard many theories. Some make a lot of sense, some are just nonsense. But for what it's worth, I don't really understand it. Nevertheless, notwithstanding our lack of clarity for the reasoning behind the war, we know there is a war. We know Russia attacked Ukraine, and we know too many people have died and millions are refugees. We know people are still stuck and can't get out, and we know the living conditions are worsening by the day. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us that from everything one sees and hears, we must learn a lesson. And I'd like to share with you some thoughts and important lessons I take from it. You may have realized this on your own, but nevertheless it's worth repeating. And that is how this relates to the land of Israel. Surrounded by enemies, the Jewish people must be able to defend our brothers and sisters in Israel by ourselves. We cannot be reliant on anyone to do this for us. Talk is cheap. People make commitments and promises all the time, but don't follow through. They even sign their names on paper and then change their mind and pull out. In 1991, when Ukraine declared its independence, it was the third largest nuclear state. Over the course of the next few years, Ukraine would agree to give up being a nuclear state, conditioned on, among other things, assurances from the United States, Russia, and the UK to respect the existence, sovereignty, and the existing borders of Ukraine. As well, Russia, the US, and the UK reaffirmed their obligation to refrain from threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine. This was signed on December 5th, 1994, in what is known as the Budapest Memorandum. Almost 28 years later, in 2022, when you read this, you are awakened to a sad reality. Leadership of nations change and all populations go through political mood swings. When it comes to self-defense, you cannot rely on others. Even the nations with whom you sign treaties cannot be trusted blindly. This week, in addition to beginning the book of Vayikra, the third book of the Torah, Leviticus, it's Shabbos Zocher. We read a special section of the Torah which instructs us to remember what Amalek did to the Jews when we left Egypt and to eliminate them. Although many of us, especially in the so-called enlightened societies, like to think that since we are peace-loving people, everyone else is too, the reality is not so. As long as we haven't eliminated Amalek, evil still exists. Thugs, terrorists, murderers, rapists, and sex trafficking all exist. Amalek is ready to wreak havoc even to its own detriment, even if it means getting beaten. All too often we make the mistake of trying to understand Amalek. Evil can't be understood, it has to be eliminated. We must be proactive and do all in our power to stop the terrorists and rapists and murderers before they get a chance to act. If you give a madman time, he'll find a way to wreak havoc. When we left Egypt, we were invincible. Everyone knew not to mess with the Jews. Our God had just struck the mighty Egyptians with 10 plagues. Our God had just split the sea for us and then drowned the Egyptian forces pursuing us. Our God had surrounded us with special clouds to protect us from harm. Every nation in the world either stood in awe or at a minimum knew not to interfere or attempt to stop us. One nation, Amalek, couldn't fathom the march of good, the march of God. Unprovoked, it sent its army to the desert and attacked us just outside our clouds of protection. Knowing full well that they would most likely not succeed in defeating the Jews, they were well aware that they would suffer huge losses. But reason and logic weren't in the equation. They attacked anyways. Our rabbis give the analogy of a boiling hot bath. It's so hot that everyone knows not to go in there lest they will get burned. Upon seeing the fear on everyone's face, one idiot decided to put his foot in the water to prove that it can be done, knowing full well that he would get burned in the process. That's Amalek. And as long as we haven't completely eliminated him, we must do all we can to protect ourselves by ourselves. Every time Israel is attacked by a terror organization with rockets and bombs and must go on a defensive mission and sometimes even war, I always hear those who argue to stop and pull back. The rhetoric always turns to giving up the land. An imaginary picture of the future is painted, where if you just give up some territory to the enemy, all problems will go away. And assurances and guarantees of protection from outside countries are also always made. In March 2022, besides for the aggressor Russia, I haven't heard people making this claim to give up chunks of the country to the aggressor in return for peace. We shouldn't make this mistake when it comes to the land of Israel either. May God grant the strength to all peace-loving people. May Hashem bless all those in harm's way with safety and security. May peace prevail and dominate in all of Western Europe. I wish you a good Shabbos.